Thank you very much indeed. I have somewhat provocatively, I think, entitled my presentation today with a question to suggest that maybe the transport sector is the most challenging sector of all to decarbonise. And maybe I will convince you of that, and maybe I will not. Here's the reason, some of the reasons why, here we go. Okay, I can now see my presentation.
Presentation, Jillian. It is there.
Are you still only seeing the first slide? I do apologise, it doesn't seem to be moving on.
Yes, it's the first that we can see.
Okay, it's not moving on, I'm afraid.
Ah, too bad. Can you manage without it?
Okay, I will try and do so. Okay, so what I was going to talk about initially was to just show you some facts and figures about the scale of the challenge. We've heard today various statistics. Transport sector in its entirety is responsible for about a quarter of direct CO2 emissions globally. And it's still 96% fueled by fossil fuels. And that's an enormous amount of inertia, an enormous amount of change across all the different modes of transport that we need to fossil fuelize. Road transport is responsible for the majority, about 3/4 of the CO2 in the transport sector. We do hear that aviation and shipping are the components that are growing the most rapidly, which is true, but nevertheless, road transport is still rising. This is the point. Almost wherever you look around the globe, the transport sector is still rising in terms of emissions, and it has emissions which are higher than they were in 1990. And when we focus the mind on statistics such as only 1 in 10 adults around the globe use the car as their main mode of transport, have access to a car as their main mode of transport, we can see just how much growth there is still yet to come in the transport sector, whether it's car and car use and car ownership, whether it's people having access to aviation, to fly around the world, more trade around the world. There is a huge amount of growth still to take place in the sector. So we know that the Paris Agreement is about budgets, about carbon budgets, and not about end dates, which we're working to. It's about the area under the curve. It's about the cumulative emissions. When you take that fact, when you take the agreement set out in the Paris Agreement and you apportion them to regions of the world, to countries of the world, and you actually also apportion them to sectors such as the transport sector, what that works out as is that we have less than 10 years in the European Union to, if we go at the current rate that we're going in terms of the transport, in terms of the growth of transport, we have in 10 years, we would have used up all of the budget for the transport sector. When you look at it in that timescale, it is absolutely out of the question that we can rely on any of the technological solutions we have heard about today already. Norway is a special case I'll come to in a moment, but electrification just of the car fleet, let alone vans, let alone heavy goods vehicles, let alone air and shipping, electrification of the car fleet is going so slowly that it will actually be really quite irrelevant in terms of reducing the amount of fuel used against a growing curve by 2030. So we have to really come up with a radical new plan of action. In the UK, the transport sector is the only sector of the economy where there has been no reduction in carbon emissions since 1990. It's around about a fifth of emissions in the UK. In 1990, it's now over a third when we include aviation and shipping. And also this discussion of net zero, what we have in our climate legislation in the UK, which is actually widely applicable everywhere, is that for transport, it isn't about net zero, it's about absolute zero. We have reserved some of our capacity for negative emissions, which are very expensive solutions and very niche and not all proven. We have reserved that for aviation and a little bit of shipping, but for surface transport, we are talking about getting down to absolute zero. And when you take together the pathway trajectory that I have outlined with the Paris Agreement, and you start to model that in terms of really pushing on in terms of electrification, how quickly we can go with electrification, you put that together, what you see by 2030, regardless of the scale at which you look at this at, you might look at it at city region scale, at a national scale, at the European regional scale. When you model that forward and are, like I say, very optimistic about levels of electrification, what we see is that we still need at least 20% reduction in the amount of miles travelled relative to today's levels. So that equates to a 2 to 4% reduction year on year on the amount of miles travelled across all modes. And if we can't get that level of reduction in our heavy goods vehicles and our van traffic, because we're not willing to restrict trade, then we have to get even more reduction out of our private motorised mobility. Now, we can talk about electrification. I am not in any way saying it's not part of the solution. We have to push that technological solution as far and as fast as we can, whilst taking account of equity and sustainability issues that we have also already heard about today. But what's happening is, at the same time that we are focusing on electrification, getting really excited, looking at sales figures, these are the figures we look at, Norway's at over 50%, Netherlands around 10% of sales, etc., and getting really excited at seeing that figure going up and up. We've not looked over here where the really big problem is at the other end of the car market, which is the growth in uptake of very large and heavy fossil-fueled vehicles, usually categorised in one lump as SUVs. This is a report from the International Energy Agency, who have identified the growth in uptake of SUVs as being the number one reason why carbon emissions have continued to grow in the last year or two, with sales of SUVs up at around 40% of the global car market at the moment. When you translate that through, as I have done in a variety of different ways, into the UK market, in the UK, as is the trend across Europe on average CO2 emissions at the tailpipe for cars sold into the European market have been going up in recent years, not going down. And that's not because of a reduction in the number of diesel cars that are purchased, which are more CO2 friendly, but because of this growth in the average size and weight of vehicles. It means that in the UK, for every one battery electric vehicle that has been sold in the last year or two, 15 SUVs have been sold. So totally negating this excitement, this wonderful news about the uptake of electric vehicles. Now, Norway, as I alluded to before, is a special case. And we hear a lot about if Norway can do it, Norway's got over 50%, fantastic, this is what we're aiming for. Well, we are aiming for that, but let's get this into perspective. Norway started taxing internal combustion engine vehicles many, many years ago, very heavily. So there was already there a tax on ICEs, which did not have to be increased to encourage electric vehicles. It was just that electric vehicles needed to not be taxed as much. That is a much, much more politically friendly, publicly acceptable way of encouraging the uptake of electric vehicles, as opposed to the UK, where taxes on internal combustion engines are relatively low, and we would have to have very draconian increases on the incumbent technology. And EV market shares in Norway have taken a very long time to get to where they are, given the number of years that those incentives have been in place, and the push towards that. And most importantly of all, I would argue, to enable those things to have taken place, Norway's had it easy because it doesn't have its own car manufacturing base to halt the progress in that happening. So the main message is that we've got two ways of reducing carbon. Very, very simplistically, very broadly, we can get rid of the petrol and diesel, or we can reduce the amount that these vehicles are used. The fact is that we've got a lot of focus on one, but the sooner we do that, the less we have to reduce the amount that we travel, but we actually have to do both. There is no question that we have to do both. But that doesn't mean that we have to focus on cycling and walking and all these lovely, nice solutions at the very local level. Why? Because you look at somewhere then like the Netherlands that has phenomenal rates of cycling for local journeys, but actually the per capita carbon footprint of the Dutch is as high as it is anywhere else. Why? Because they do lots of cycling and walking for their short journeys, but they use the car an enormous amount, and they own cars and they own big cars, and they use those for the longer journeys. Frankly, they just do more of everything because their travelling hasn't been restricted in any ways. There's been no caps on that travelling. And that's because longer journeys are actually the journeys that are responsible for the majority of carbon. This chart shows you that in the UK, only 3% of trips that are travelled by car are responsible for 30% of the emissions by car. So those very few long distance journeys, usually for leisure, are the ones that we don't talk about restricting at all. And they're the ones that are growing, and they're the ones that actually encourage the uptake of large family vehicles just to do those minority of trips per year. So what we have to do is talk not just about mode shift, we have to talk about destination shifting, about shrinking our distance horizons, which is about an awful lot more than the transport sector. It's about where we live, where we work, job markets, housing markets, where we put services, and keeping travel as local as we can. And that then brings us to flying, which is the growth part of the personal travel market. Such an inequitable distribution of flying. Globally, 1% of the population are responsible for about 70% of the flights. In the UK, the same figure is 15% are responsible for 70% of the flights. But that's a hugely inequitable distribution and access to flying. So when we talk about restricting it, we often think it's unfair to increase the prices because it's going to hit people and not allow people to explore the globe. But this is a relatively recent phenomena that we're talking about this growth in flying. A generation or so back, this wasn't such a ubiquitous activity, and it's still not ubiquitous. So finally then, we require an urgent new plan. It's not a plan that is about technology versus behaviour. We need both. But when we talk about behaviour, we're not talking about small-scale urban solutions, cycling, walking and mode shift, because they actually are important, but they're partial. We have to start talking about the things that are taboo, the things around long-distance, leisure, activity, and then thinking about things which we think are on the margins, but actually are likely to be really very transitional. E-bikes, car sharing, talking about different models of ownership and different models of accessing mobility. And if we are going to talk about technology, which of course we are and we must, we have to think about the wider footprint of the technology and the vehicles and the components, and we need less of those vehicles. The important thing is that we need to do it, but we need to think about a shrinkage in the number of vehicles that we're building in total. It should be, wherever we're living, everybody's right to live without a car and do the things that they need to do without a car. That's what the goal is that we should be aiming for. That whole idea of a radical plan is likely to challenge economic growth. That's a fact. And we have to start having that conversation. And we have to start having the conversation that in order to do this, those people responsible for the most emissions, the excess emitters, largely high-income emitters, have got to reduce disproportionately more. Within a country, between countries, we have to get the high emitters to reduce the amount that they are doing and get them to pay more disproportionately over and above certain thresholds in order to get that to happen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jillian. I can say at least that I was convinced that this is a huge challenge, no doubt about it. And I know that I promised that we were going to have a short Q&A session after your presentation, but I can see we don't have the time. So, and also, but the thing is, you are joining the panel discussion. I think these are things, as you said at the end of your presentation, we have to take that debate. So we're going to move that over to the debate. So we're going to just stay put. We'll get back to you. And well, thank you. And I have all these questions that I want to ask you. And there are questions from the audience. So just hang in there and we'll get there. But I just have to move on and introduce our final speaker. So you'll get back to us later on, Jillian. Thank you so far.